Hey, well, today I'm angry because people never learn. And the learning I'm talking about is that they never learn not to trust. And I'm talking about the government, the experts, and anybody else that you may think of who appears to be credible, whose opinion is trusted blindly. Now, let's talk about where we are currently with this COVID-19 epidemic. And these are the actual facts as of today. And this is through the 6th of July. 2020, and you can see the total number of cases, total deaths. But we're talking about where we go from here. This is the main issue of today's show. What can we assume? Are we to assume that because of these protests that the number of cases and deaths is about to accelerate again? Are we in danger? We get information that hospital ICU rooms are full. Hospitals come out denying it. It's impossible to know what the accurate information actually is. So here is some raw data for you, and you can form your own opinion. These graphs that I'm going to show you are from a site called Worldometer, which has been a pretty reliable source for the last several months since this pandemic began. And you can see this is the total number of cases per day in the US. You can see that the number of daily new cases peaked in the first week of April and has been fairly consistent through the end of June, and only just started accelerating again at the end of June. So what would we expect to see? Well, if we look at cases and we assume that some percentage of those cases are going to die, then we would expect that the chart showing number of deaths would track the number of cases with a lag. But what do we see when we actually look at the number of deaths? We can see that the number of deaths peaked towards the middle to end of April and has been declining ever since. How can this possibly make sense? How could you have this increase in cases that we've been seeing for the last 2 weeks without any sign that deaths are increasing? Well, I have a theory, and it does fit the facts. Tell me if you think this is actually what's happening. My hypothesis is that most of us caught this virus, and we caught it in February and March. And the number of deaths and the number of cases are not measuring what we think they're measuring. First of all, number of deaths, I don't really have confidence in that number. I know a lot of people who have died with COVID-19 and not from COVID-19 have been marked as having died from COVID-19. I believe the number of deaths is exaggerated, but that still doesn't explain why we're seeing this increase in the number of cases, and as of yet, no increase in the number of deaths. Here's my explanation for this. Imagine, if you will, that a vast number of the population has the virus, and we test 10,000 people a day. If my hypothesis is correct and most people caught it early, then as testing continues, the number of new cases will continue to rise. But that just reflects our increased knowledge. It doesn't reflect the fact that someone is a new infection. All of the government officials that are looking at total numbers of cases and extrapolating out an increase in the number of deaths are making a serious mistake. If these people have been sick for a long time and only just now have we discovered that they're sick, then you wouldn't expect the death rate to rise. So let me explain this more clearly. Let's assume that everybody in the United States contracted this virus over a 1 month period from the beginning of March to the end of March of this year. As our testing has increased, the total number of cases will continue to rise and will continue to rise throughout the indefinite future as the number of cases approaches the number of people in the United States. But the number of people who are going to die from it has already transpired. Most of those people are already dead. And if you take one more look at the graph that shows you the number of deaths in the US, you can see that it's dramatically lower than it's been. By the way, these data points are through the end of 7/6 of 2020. And you can see the number of new deaths has been falling for 2 months, even as the number of cases has accelerated recently. We believe that the virus takes between 2 weeks and 3 weeks to take effect. If somebody's going to get sick, very sick, they'll know within 2 or 3 weeks. This surge in the number of cases is, I will point out again, not being reflected in the number of deaths. There are only two possible explanations for this. Either the virus has mutated and is not as harmful as it once was, and therefore the number of cases and the number of deaths, that ratio will continue to get better. In other words, fewer and fewer people will be dying from the virus. Or, if my hypothesis is correct, most people have already been exposed to it, and those who are going to die have died. The fact that we're now testing the remaining 90% of the population doesn't mean that the virus is expanding into that 90% of the population. It's already been there, and the effects have already been felt. But we can't get reliable information. Right now, governors are scared to be seen as inactive or not responsive to this crisis, and for them it is much easier to overreact and explain that than to have people die and have to explain that outcome. So you kind of understand why they've taken this approach, but the data certainly seems to indicate now that the hazard seems, I repeat, seems to have passed. The number of new deaths is not climbing. There's no sign at all of any increase at all. Nothing really explains this except for the hypothesis that we have it. People who have had it and were going to succumb to it have succumbed, and that the danger is mainly past. Now, we may face this again in the fall. Influenza viruses, flu viruses, coronaviruses often reappear year after year, and we may find a more virulent strain again in the wintertime. But for now, we're in the middle of summer. Even though the number of cases seems to be accelerating, the number of deaths is not. How much longer will the governors wait before they actually acknowledge the facts? The facts seem clear. Most of us have had it, actively have it, and almost all of us will be unaffected by it. How much longer are we going to be captive to these politicians who don't understand science at all? You've seen the data. Make up your own mind and wake up.